Well, hello there, friends. Welcome back to the Construction Leadership Podcast, where we help construction executives lead high-performing teams that finish on time and under budget without all the firefighting and babysitting so you can lead with focus and control. I am your host, Bradley Hartmann. Now, as I record this on Tuesday, July 14th, I'm going to say something, and while this could be perceived as political in nature, this is not political in nature. This is a statement of fact. The negotiations going on between the United States and our leadership and Iran are not going well. And I have the sense the Iranians are kind of just playing a game with the United States. They're just kind of messing around. They're having fun, saying they're in, and then they're out, and then they're juking, and they're jiving. Lots of stuff going on over there. But needless to say, this has become a frustration for the leaders of our great nation. And while I do love negotiation, I wrote a book on negotiating in the construction industry. I'm fascinated by it. It's something that I love to do both personally and professionally. I can tell you one thing I never want to do is try to negotiate for peace with anyone in the Middle East. I probably wouldn't be up for that, and I'd hardly be the first person. But anyway, my point here is after reading headline after headline in the Wall Street Journal over the last couple months about the ceasefire and then more bombing and then more negotiations and then maybe a ceasefire and then maybe some more bombing and, well, we're negotiating. These timelines continue to get bumped. It had me just thinking about some of the fundamentals of negotiation. So we're going to move off the Strait of Hormuz conversation, and we're just going to think more broadly. So what I'm not doing here is giving advice to any leaders of our great country about how they should be negotiating with Iran. This is all for us. But what got me thinking about this was the headlines. And I started just thinking about kind of the top 5 non-obvious things that if I'm entering into a negotiation, I want to be thinking about. I want to keep them top of mind because if I don't, they might slip my mind and might give an advantage to the other side. So these are not my top 5 negotiation tips of all time. What these are the top 5 ones that are top of mind now in no specific order. So the first one is just understanding who has the authority to make a decision. And there are 2 sides to this coin. If there are other people on the other side of the negotiation that ultimately have decision-making rights, I want to do whatever I can to make sure that they are actively involved in the negotiation. So that means all the voices in the room have the capability of saying yes or no, or trading concessions, or generally being part of the negotiation. Now, on our side, it is helpful to have an ultimate authority who's not involved. And I'll give you an example. In my own business, when we are negotiating for something, my wife is our CFO, and both personally and professionally, she is very much the boss. So while I'm performing the negotiation, at some point I will say, this is great, so let me go back, let me meet with my CFO, and then we can give you an answer on this date. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a separation between me being the ultimate decision maker and a colleague who's not part of that negotiation. So this cuts both ways, but is one of the initial things we want to think about when ultimately getting to a decision that is mutually beneficial. The second one here, likewise, represents 2 sides of the same coin. And I guess now that I think about it, I guess all of these represent 2 sides of the same coin. So I'll stop saying that. But this one is about deadlines, and deadlines drive action. We know that. Most deadlines are BS. I will occasionally refer to them as alive lines. They're the opposite of deadlines. It means something's going to happen and we're going to move it forward. But we have to be wary when other people are putting artificial deadlines on us to compress the time frame and then move them. And the reason deadlines, artificial and otherwise, are useful is because that puts pressure on making a decision. It forces the other side's hands, or it forces our hand to make a move one way or another. And in negotiation, like life, deals are either moving forward or they're moving backward. There's no such thing as a deal that's just in stasis, not moving at all. So always be thinking about deadlines, moving deadlines. Are they artificial? Are you deploying them against your other party? Are they using them against you? Are we both creating artificial deadlines that neither of us believe in? This is absolutely an important element in understanding how to drive action and ultimately get to some sort of conclusion whether we land the deal or not. Relevant to deadlines, but in a different way, number 3 is all about clock management. And like most things in life, I come back to a sporting analogy and I'm thinking about my college quarterback career, which was largely a failure, but I got into one game and the game was out of hand, so I didn't manage the clock. But let's pretend I did. As a quarterback, you have a couple different options here. Obviously, one of them is the hurry up offense. You can skip the huddle altogether. You can use hand signals, largely pass the ball around and move down the field quickly. You can go on offense fast, or you can slow it down. We can take our time in the huddle. We can get to the line of scrimmage with 10 seconds, and I can wait until the very last second to snap the football. But I get to control the pace of the game. And the same is true in negotiation. You want to think about the tempo. When things are going well, you might want to continue that momentum, keep up that pace, maybe even speed it up a little bit. But there's also times when things aren't going well and you're feeling uncomfortable and you feel like maybe it's set up for a win-lose situation, to take a break, to slow down, to call a hiatus. Say, let's stop negotiating for a period of 2 full weeks and come back to it. This idea of clock management and thinking about what pace we want to set to ultimately achieve our objectives is something that needs to be considered. The 4th one I come back to is all about specificity. If you've listened to this podcast before, you might have heard me talk about the 3 fundamentals that I strive for and teach when it comes to leadership, and that is thoughtfulness, specificity, and generosity. And thoughtfulness is quite literally having evidence that we have been thinking. We have been exploring our own experiences. We've been meeting other people. We've been reading about other people. We have vicariously explored other people's experiences. That is the definition of being thoughtful. And when you are thoughtful, it allows you to be specific. So in negotiations, when people present information that is general, we should view this as an opportunity to convert that generality to something more specific. And the best way to do that is through questioning. And when people will bring up an idea or an example or something happened from the past or a previous deal, I will zero in on that statement, if essential, if important, and really drive to specificity. I'm going to look for evidence that this is true. And a lot of times in negotiation, we feel like it's being rude or it's too aggressive. And we'll say, well, if they said it, it's got to be true. I'll say, well, that's extremely general. How do we know that? And if we think this element could swing the deal from good or bad or decrease the probability that we'll ultimately get what we need out of this deal, I will zero in on that. And I will just hammer it with question after question, because when people only have generalities, there's often a reason for it. And if you want a recipe for losing in a negotiation, it's getting people around you or maybe yourself acting shy. That doesn't mean you're aggressive, but it does mean you're going to zero in on anything that comes across as general. Generalities require much less effort and often hint at indifference. And the 5th and final one we've talked about on occasion on this Construction Leadership podcast. It's known as loss aversion. And when we take a step back in any negotiation, there are one of 4 outcomes. Either we can partner together, they can partner with somebody else, they can partner with no one but pursue this project or objective on their own, or they could do nothing. And what loss aversion refers to is that the pain of losing something is greater than the joy of gaining something. Legendary behavioral economist Danny Kahneman said, losses loom larger than gains. And recently we were talking with a client and they were deciding whether or not to make a big investment in this piece of technology for their business. They'd been looking at it for 2 or 3 years and ultimately decided, no, now's not the right time. And it wasn't necessarily because of cash flow or because of talent. It was largely about feelings, about how they feel about the current economic climate. And my job here in this situation was not to tell them what to do. It was to provide them perspective. And one of the perspectives I provided was the cost of doing nothing. And if you choose to do nothing, that is absolutely a choice. That will send you down a different path. And there was an acknowledgement that they thought that doing nothing was safer. So while they ultimately didn't change their decision, it really helps to think through and play out and put a cost, hard cost, soft cost, resources, capital, talent, and time among the 4 possible outcomes. We partner together, you partner with a different competitor, you partner with no one and do it yourself, or you do nothing. Regardless of those 4 choices, whichever one you or the other party makes, there is always a cost. There's always a trade-off. And too often we look at the option of doing nothing as being costless, which is definitely not true. If you factor that into your negotiations, I will believe you will have more expansive discussions and come to different alternatives that very well be more beneficial for you and your other party. All right, friends, I'm forcing myself to stop. That is 5. I do believe that negotiation principles are like a muscle. And if you don't use them for a while, it can atrophy. So making the investment in books and having those as reference materials, there's lots of good podcasts on negotiation, surely, but keeping those close at hand and using tools to be more thoughtful will allow you to engage in negotiations which remove the emotion that in general are not going to help you land at a mutually beneficial outcome. With that being said, I will circle back to where we started. I do pray for peace in the Middle East and everywhere else. And fine then, that's all I've got. You're owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.